Kathy Olewski, the host for the Vasculitis Foundation Educational Webinar Series. I love doing these informative webinars as I'm also a patient living with MPA vasculitis. This webinar is one in a series of short interviews with doctors who attended the 2023 American College of Rheumatology Convergence. Today we have with us Dr. Jason Springer. And Dr. Springer is an associate professor of medicine in the Department of Immunology and Rheumatology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center and the co-director of the Vanderbilt Vasculitis Clinic. Welcome, Dr. Springer. It's so nice to have you here today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And if you wouldn't mind giving us your disclosure, if you have any.
So relevant to this is, so I did serve as a consultant for ChemoCentrix, which is relevant to, I'll be talking about avacopan a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Springer, so you were recently at the ACR annual meeting in San Diego. And for those of you that don't know, it's a 4-day convention where rheumatologists from around the world come together. So I would just like to ask, what were some of the main takeaways or highlights from the meeting? I'm a vasculitis patient, as I said, with kidney involvement. So I'd like to know, did you learn about any new research or clinical studies that are relevant to patients like me?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, especially a lot in the future that's coming down the pipeline. I think there's a continued effort to try to minimize the steroids in our treatment of forms of vasculitis while still effectively treating patients. And so there's a lot of research going into that. In regards to GPA and MPA, avacopan was approved not too long ago. And so I think the main questions people are asking now is like, how long to use it? And does it work equally as well for all, manifestations? We know it works well for the kidneys. And so does it work well for other manifestations as well? Also in GPA and MPA, there are efforts to look at medications similar to rituximab that target the B cells, which is a type of white blood cell, but maybe have a longer mechanism of that, or a longer duration of action. And so there's multiple studies looking at that. There's also new outcome criteria that are being developed for ANCA-associated vasculitis, which I think is exciting. And these outcome criteria were developed not only from physicians' perspectives, but also patient perspectives as well. And so that's exciting. I think EGPA, I think it's an exciting time for EGPA. I think there's a lot of more studies and enthusiasm for new medicines in this disease. Rituximab, there's going to be a lot of studies in rituximab. We don't especially have great data yet that rituximab works as well in EGPA as it does for GPA and MPA. And so those studies are up and coming. And there's a lot of other potential drugs that people are looking at as well. And so I think it is exciting for EGPA research. GCA, I think, is exciting as well. There's a lot of new possible medications coming down or new studies looking at new medications, and specifically like JAK-inhibitors and other potential drugs as well. So I think that's exciting. Takayasu's, I think it's exciting that we're just seeing more of these multi-center trials. So in Takayasu's, it's such a rare disease that it is very difficult to put together these large studies. And so I think just as a vasculitis community, we've been more effective at collaborating with one another and developing these larger studies. And so I think the research in Takayasu's is exciting as well. There's a newly described disease called VEXAS. VEXAS is it's caused by a specific genetic mutation, but it's seen in various forms of autoimmune diseases, and some of which include like PAN and GCA. And these patients tend to be older males with kind of low blood counts. With identifying these patients can help us to treat more effectively, potentially. And there's more studies coming out in terms of how common this is and what the most effective treatment is as well. And, I think, of course, the VPPRN, I think it's coming out with some exciting things. I'm always impressed by the amount of data on the VPREG in terms of, that it's definitely something we need to know more about is, how to effectively manage patients that become pregnant during vasculitis treatment. And so, yeah, those were my main highlights.
Okay, great. Those are some wonderful and exciting points. I have a couple of questions, though, as a patient. First of all, can you tell me a little bit about what outcome criteria means? I'm not sure I understand that term.
Oh yeah, for studies, you have to decide what is your endpoint. Like you're going to compare two groups, and based on what, So, for instance, remission would be an outcome. So like remission at 12 months, for instance. So in group A versus group B, what is the percentage in remission at 12 months, and that would be an outcome. And so they're working at developing a composite outcome measure that will, traditionally, studies have been very, biased towards what the physicians think are important, I guess, in terms of, maybe remission, relapse, things like that. And this is really trying to pull in the patient perspective as well, in addition to the physician perspective, and come up with an outcome measure that includes both perspectives, if that makes sense.
It does. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Also, you mentioned JAK inhibitors. I don't know what JAK inhibitors are.
Oh yeah, they're a little bit different from biologics in that they're actually considered technically a small molecule, but JAK inhibitor just refers to what it targets. So these drugs, there are these receptors on cells called JAK, and they actually will bind. Some of them will bind to the JAK inhibitor and inhibit it and prevent the white blood cell or inflammatory cell from wreaking havoc, essentially. So JAK refers to the that receptor that's on the cell that it targets.
Okay.
And there's a whole class of them out there now.
So that makes sense. I didn't understand. I got it now. I also wondered, was there any information? I've been reading a lot about CAR T cell therapy, and I don't really know very much about it, but I hear that that's new information that's coming down.
Yeah, CAR T cell therapy is basically taking someone's T cells, which is a type of white blood cell, out of your body, and then kind of programming them to attack the bad cell, so to speak. And so it's been used successfully there's smaller studies that have shown some success in autoimmune diseases like lupus and others. And we don't have the data yet, but I think there is enthusiasm about looking in vasculitis as well. So I do see a future potentially in that as well. So yeah, we'll see.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I like to clarify things that we as patients are hearing about, but we don't understand yet. So I appreciate that. Thanks. And then one last question: did the ACR address, are there any studies or research involving COVID anymore in compromised patients, autoimmune compromise?
Yeah, I'll say I didn't see quite as much of COVID research out there now. I mean, I guess it was I saw a lot more of it last ACR, and the kind of themes that came out in terms of course, patients that are immunosuppressed are at higher risk, and we know that rituximab is one of those medications that is one of the higher risk medications in regards to COVID in terms of causing more severe outcomes. So I think that everyone knows that well now, and so we're cautious with rituximab, and we also know that rituximab does affect your response to vaccines too. The vaccines will not be as effective during rituximab therapy, and so I'd say maybe last ACR that became more apparent, and luckily we're not seeing it as, I guess it's maybe calmed down a little bit. So, but yeah, those are probably the main themes that came out of the COVID research. Yeah.
Okay, well, that was great. Well, thank you so much for sharing these highlights that you took away from it, Dr. Springer. It sounds like there's some exciting research happening, and we're moving in new directions, which is always great to hear every year.